Hi, I'm Katja Williams, the Rural Mum, and welcome to the farm. Today, my guest is Sally Warriner. Sally, thank you for coming today.
Thank you for asking me, Katja.
Can you please start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you are and your background?
Right. So I'm Sally Warriner, and I am a next generation up twice from you. I'm now 72, and I have just written, or last year, wrote a book about my 25 years on the land, which was from when I was, ta-da! Katja just showed my book. So I had written for various magazines before while I was sort of short stories for magazines while I was out bush, but I hadn't ever really attacked writing a memoir, and I didn't know that I could. But when I decided, there were a couple of triggers that made me decide I was going to write a book, because I really wanted to outline the multiple tasks that women in the bush have to perform, and with at times, for some women, very little recognition. Times have changed enormously since I was out there. I mean, it was 40 years ago when I first went bush. Oh, 72, 30, no, 45 years ago when I first went out there. And so times really have changed. I have sons your age and grandchildren, and I do know that their fathering and family contribution is way, way, way different from how it was in my day. That's what I wrote a book about, and I've actually done, I've sold pretty well, and I'm getting lots of feedback from people who are enjoying it. But I know you girls are still out there multitasking like crazy, and I'm well aware of how many jobs there are that you are expected to do, and possibly, and I'm sure do very efficiently. So basically that's an outline about me.
Before we continue, we'll give a shout out to today's supporting link, Tupperware. In July, the offer is all about sustainability. I pledge to waste less, use reusable towels instead of paper, and use reusable containers. The link for the Tupperware, an affiliate link for the Rural Mum community, is down in the show notes and the description below. For those who are looking for inspiration on taking meals down the paddock, I highly recommend their glass range. I will also add their name and description down in the description below. Now let's continue with today's interview. And Sally, you've mentioned that you have sons and grandchildren. So how many sons, or what makes up your family unit? And when did they, what years did they come into your life?
Right, well, I went out bush in 1976 when I was returning from, I'd done a couple of postgrad nursing degrees in London, and I was returning from overseas, and I had a sister who was married to a vet in Broome. So I decided to go and visit her. She'd had 2 children. I'd been travelling for 4 years, and I was going to pop out there and pop up to Broome and say hello. I've lost the thread. What was the question? How did I get out there?
No, your family.
Oh, my family unit.
Tell me about your boys and who makes up your family.
I met my husband in Broome when I was up visiting my sister, and very sadly his first wife had died of a cancer at age 30 and left him with a 2- and 3-year-old son. So when I married him 6 years after that, I inherited an 8- and a 9-year-old son who are now 53 and 50, or a bit older, I think, with 5 children who are grown, the oldest being 28. So that's one side of the family. Then my husband and I fostered a couple of Indigenous kids when we were on Newcastle waters, and they were part of the family, and they went away to school with my kids. And then I gave birth to 3 sons of my own, of our own. And the oldest one is 40 and the youngest one is 30 something. And so I basically brought up 7 kids, and I've now got, reams of grandkids, and I'm tired.
Yes, I can imagine that would keep you very busy.
I'm very glad I live in Byron Bay, which is 2.5 hours from Brisbane, where I have several grandchildren. So I'm not doing 2 days a week. Would Nanny Sal do 2 days a week for the rest of your life? Fortunately, I've gone back to work here, so I'm actually still nursing in Byron Bay, but I do go up and do granny duties in Brisbane often.
Yes.
Not as often if I was living there.
Yes, Sally, you've been on 3 stations early in your motherhood journey and with your life with who you refer to in your book as the GM. Can you tell me a little bit about each station and what it was like moving to each?
So the first station I was on was Mount House, which is in the East Kimberley, and it was my first real experience. It was my first experience of the Kimberley, and utter beauty of it. And I totally and absolutely fell in love. It's still my soul country. I really think that the Kimberley is some of the most beautiful country in the world, and I've travelled widely. So it was 1976. So it was, I spent a lot of time on horseback. I did a lot of mustering. The GM was had a 150 held together with a rubber band and a prayer. And I did a lot of, a lot of hours in that plane with him, diving in and out of riverbeds and pulling back and just getting over the top of the mesas. We were only there for 6 months when he was offered a managership on Brunette Downs on the Barclay. Totally different country, but extraordinary nonetheless. So we went from sort of a smallish. Ken had been on Mount House for 7 years, and but I was only actually there for 6 months after we were married, and then so we moved from the Kimberley to Brunette Downs. And that was sort of a premier Barclay station that was owned by King Ranch when we moved there, and then bought by AA, Australian Agricultural. So it was big corporate. And I hadn't had any children at that point, and there was already staff in place there. There was already a housekeeper. There were already a lot of garden. There was quite a big staff because it was 50,000 cattle and a stud and a quarter horse stud. So it was huge. So it was a learning curve for me. Basically, I didn't have a real job as such, and I didn't have any children at that point. But it was busy, and again, I spent quite a lot of time, on horseback or out there learning, really, because I didn't know a lot about the pastoral industry, and certainly not the big corporates. And then we bought a cattle property when we left Brunette, or because we left Brunette Downs, we bought a cattle property in partnership with 2 other people on the West Barclay, which is Mitchell and Flinders grass, pretty much flat throughout. Again, nothing like the Kimberley, but beautiful in its vastness and isolation. Quite differently moving from Brunette Downs, which had one of the best, it had a burgeoning Santa Gertrudis herd, beautiful cattle, really top quality quarter horses, and beautiful homestead, and 50 staff. We were 50 staff working on that property because it was a corporate and it was large. We went to Newcastle Waters where there was a 3-bedroom 5-row house. I was 8 months pregnant when we drove across that grid. Not a blade of grass around the homestead because there were goats. There was a creek down the front with mud in it and a bad water supply. Hardly any fencing. Hardly TB and brucellosis were rife. We started from scratch, basically, with an enormous debt because we bought it with 2 other people who had not much money, and we bought it in 1981. And then interest rates went to 17% in 1983, and we were struggling, really badly struggling. But fortunately, one of our partners' first cousin, Edwina Bailey, was Kerry Packer's first cousin. And so he came up and visited and liked the bush and liked bush people and offered to buy it. And we developed the third biggest pastoral company in Australia on his golden checkbook, which was very nice.
It would have been, and that would have, I can just imagine the uplifting feeling that would have been, particularly on the back of those interest rates, having someone who you developed quite a close relationship over the years with as well. So not only a great friendship to come out of that, but also the weight of the debt off your shoulders. It's definitely a unique feeling when you first come into either a family farming operation or into the agricultural world, to hear some of the financial figures that are thrown around. And if it's not something that you're used to, then it can feel quite heavy and dictate the way that you behave and act going forward. Excellent. So, with each station that you moved to, they were very different in circumstance. Was there any top tips that you would give to anybody else moving to a station or moving to a farm that you found helped with the transition between all those stations?
Yes, they were very different. I would have to say in my case, because I was born in Toowoomba, I mean, it was a small country town at the time, and I did go to a pony club. So I actually could ride, and I came from country, I guess. But nothing prepares you for moving out to the broad acres. However, I would also say, and I'm assuming it's the same for you and your young cohort, is that I can't remember feeling totally overwhelmed with it all. It's just a matter of coping because you have to, because there's nobody else to. It's a matter of you do it because there's no one else to do it. And I don't remember feeling overwhelmed. I had done some fairly hairy nursing when I was in London, working in the East End, doing an accident and emergency course, and I thought that made me brave, but I needed to be a whole lot braver in the future. And I think it just comes naturally just to. I probably shouldn't say country people, but I think it does. I think because you're not surrounded by help, well, you certainly weren't in those days, and you're probably not a whole lot more now, surrounded by any sort of help. What I would say is that during the years that I was doing such a lot, and I had such a lot on my plate, and I wasn't feeling overwhelmed because I was nursing and doing whatever else I had to do. It's all written in the book. But there was no question of any marriage guidance counselling or psychology or any help at all. It just didn't exist out there. So that also led to you thinking, I mean, I didn't think about it. For example, now, you know, there's all sorts of help online. There's fabulous suicide lines for help for people who are really in extremeness, for the grog, for all sorts of addiction, all sorts of those problems that you can have everywhere, not just in the country, but at least country people can get on a call line now, which I can't remember ever thinking about it or thinking that I needed it. Which I obviously did because my marriage broke down after 25 years when I was 53 or something. I wonder now whether perhaps I hadn't, if I had had any sort of assistance, if I'd been a better communicator, if he had been a better communicator, if I had been able to say, I need you to say thank you more often. I mean, that's ridiculous, but that type of thing. And I guess I have focused on that in the book quite a bit because I left. But I'll also say that of those 25 years, almost all of it was just fantastic and exciting and energizing and a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful place to be up to. And I felt very grateful for that, and I still do. And all of my children have turned out into decent human beings.
Cool. Sally, was there a mantra that you lived by or that you reflected on when you were out there each day, or something, a piece of advice someone gave you that came up every now and again that would make you smile?
When I first moved from the beautiful homestead at Brunette Downs to this 3-bedroom farmerau on stilts because of the flood, the river would come up, very, very stark, barely, sparsely furnished. The contrast was quite amazing. But the lady who had been living in the house, and her name was Mrs. Payne, Payne, I still remember. And the only greenery on the whole place was some ratty bougainvillea and some oleander. You know, you can't kill either of those things.
No.
So she had, there was a plastic tablecloth on the Laminex table in the kitchen, and she had put a bowl of oleander, which was flowering brightly pink at the time. And I walked into that room and I thought, that bunch of flowers was just wonderful to me. And so I've always thought you might not have very much, but a little bowl of flowers or just some little thing can just completely turn your day around. And so I was always looking for a little flower every day. There was always something. If it wasn't the sky, if it wasn't a calf, if it wasn't something one of the kids did, life was just joyful for most of the time, with a few exceptions.
And Sally, you mentioned that you've worn many hats, and particularly when you did take on the new role at Newcastle Waters, and you reflect in your book, I think it's page 8, on all the roles that you were doing that you later turned into the guideline for your book as well as for your CV. So can you outline some of the roles that you were doing and tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, so I mean, we're all wives. Most of us are lucky enough to be mothers. I was also a registered nurse, which was very, very useful for me. And I continued to run the black box on all the stations that I was at, and ended up stitching all 3 of my kids' eyebrows. You know, when they run into the corner table and they get a little cut there? Very good, hardly any scars. Held down on the kitchen bench by the gardener, much quicker than driving 4 hours to Tennant Creek Hospital. So I was a wife and a mother and a nurse. I was a housekeeper, obviously. I was a cleaner, a housekeeper, a cook. We're all that. I was an entertainer, and I would say, I'm not exaggerating when I say 3 nights a week for 25 years, I had guests at the dinner table. At Brunette, they were all corporate visitors, and then it remained to be so when Packer bought Newcastle Waters, because it was the development years. We basically started from nothing. So we had lots of contractors and lots of vets and stockies, and when TB and Brousseau program took off, and then we'd have Packer and his friends, and we'd have Jackaroo's parents, and I had people at the table for 25 years, and I was the homestead cook. So you're also a nanny as well as, you know, a mother and a nanny, although I was very, very lucky. I would not have been able to do it if I hadn't had nannies for the most of the time that I was there, because I had a big other job, and I would have had to have given up something. I certainly didn't want to give up my nursing. So I was very lucky. And again, corporates, you know, they can afford to actually put, and they were mainly daughters of friends of mine. So there was, let me just think, I was an accountant. You know, you have to do the books. You're a bookkeeper. You're a wife, and you're a lover, and you're a mentor to Jackaroos and other people. And there'll always be other mothers who are perhaps pregnant or waiting to have children. So you'll end up mentoring as well. You're definitely a psychologist for everybody. Each one of those people you've got to be a psychologist for, to the detriment of trying to analyse your own head, I think, at times. Goodness, I was not a pilot. I was a horsewoman. I was a camp drafter. I was, you know, we're all jacks of all trades, and we can do it.
Yeah.
And do, because no one else.
If we don't do it, no one else does. Excellent. Well, then that is quite a large role that we all carry on our shoulders. Sally, was there anything that you did in particular, either on a daily basis or once a week, that was for you that helped you get through it all, or look at the smaller things? So you said, you mentioned that, whether it was the kids bringing something in, or hearing a story, or seeing the flowers, they all help. Was there something that you did for you?
Walked. I liked, in that beautiful light in the evening, we had a creek out the front, and my kids all went to the local Aboriginal school, which was mainly Aboriginal people. It's government-run school, but there weren't many white fellas there. And so the kids had all trooped down after school, and I'd have chocolate cake and they'd play. And often we'd go down to the creek. Goodness, often, except I did have a nanny that I could leave to watch the roast, and I'd take a heap of kids because I'd be cooking for dinner that night, and we'd go down to the creek at sunset, and the kids would have, tyres and what have you to play in Newcastle Creek, which did dry up, but for most of the time it was up. And that was really my time. I didn't really have to do much mothering then because they were all, they were wild. There was 20 of them. And they were safe well, I assume nothing dreadful happened. I was sort of watching, but just deep breathing in the sunset at the creek. And we had millions of galahs and cockatoos, and they would make that huge squawking, and pelicans with their reflecting on the water. So that sort of beauty, I realised how really unusual it was, and how lucky we bush people are that you can do that. And so I guess that was my special time. I mean, what else? You certainly can't get your hair done or your nails done. Or, no, I didn't really. I did at one stage when the children were all at school, I did at one stage decide I wanted to be a psychologist instead of a nurse, or as well as a nurse. So I enrolled in on a university, and it was before online. Must have been anyway, it wasn't online. And I enrolled in a psychology course, and I would take 2 hours in the afternoon to go up twice a week, to go up to my room and study it. I'd have the table all set out and everything. And I'd be thinking, rather than thinking about the layers of the brain, I'd be thinking about what I was cooking for dinner that night, or, something related to the children. Oh, I've forgotten to turn that hose off. Or, oh, goodness, that meeting, that ICPA meeting's coming up, and I haven't done my paperwork for it. So it was useless. Gave it away. Decided I didn't need it. So then I waited another 40 years and became an author. And I didn't have to study for that.
No. Reflection. Nice reflection.
Yeah.
While writing your book and reflecting on those 25 years, was there moments where you thought, maybe I could have reached out for help, or maybe I could have spoken to a certain person? Oh, done.
No, I didn't think that until it was too late.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I just didn't. I just kept forging on. And the GM was it was a big business. He was a very busy man, and we just weren't appeared. I thought that we were not as important as the job, or Packer, or the job, or the job, basically. And it was in the days before Daddy Daycare. I mean, the kids never went. They never went out with him. They'd often, when they got home from boarding school, they'd go out to Stockham. But that wasn't with Dad. That was with Stockham. They'd go and work in the yards with him occasionally, but his head was around the business, and he was hugely successful for doing that. But it took 15 to 18 years for me to work out that wasn't right, and things had to change, and you don't teach an old dog new tricks. I wasn't ever going to change.
Yeah.
But he's a wonderful father now, and a great mentor to all the boys, and has really, he's retired from Newcastle Waters, still going, business-wise flat out, but he's making up for lost time now that they're a bit older. Like one of them's 55.
So Sally, above everything else that you've already mentioned, you are a nurse, a countrywoman, a mother, and an author, and you've had an incredible life and learnt a lot along the way. Is there any inspiration or anything that you would tell anybody who is either marrying a farmer or moving to the land to inspire them that they can do it, that it is a great lifestyle, but how to equip them, I guess, with some additional education and information on moving to the farm? Is there anything that you would inspire them with?
Well, now, as a contrast, when I was out there, what we're doing right now, all the podcasts, all the various organisations, all the magazines that are now being published, around living in the bush. I think you've got a lot more information. Your generation has got, and the one above you also, has got a lot more information available. So I guess my advice would be just use the information as much as you can. And communication. That's what got me in the end, a lack of communication. And even though, I'm a talker, but there, in my day, there are a lot of bushmen who just shut down. They don't do well with a whole lot of talking, and they don't communicate well themselves. And I think it's probably still the same. There are probably a lot of men, and not just bushmen, but it seems to be more common. But women are now, and I've got 5 wonderful daughters-in-law, most of whom have got a bush background. They're brave and they're strong, and they are can-do people, and it's a confidence thing. You've got to actually build your confidence in yourself that you can do it, even though it might look hard. I have amazing faith in women. My whole life has been filled with really, truly amazing women who may not be, setting the world on fire, but they, in their own heads, they are doing wonderful things. And a confident and brave, can-do woman is just common now. You young women are absolutely taking it on. I mean, I spoke recently at a Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association lunch in Darwin. I was invited to speak there, and I've done lots of public speaking, but I walked into this room in Darwin, and it was the territory-wide, and there were quite a few people from interstate as well. I walked into this room that was 200 women in it, majority of whom were less than 50, most of them less than 40 even. And they were all dressed to the nines and drinking champagne, and they were, all of them, because I spoke to as many as I possibly could, in some sort of management position. They were either head stockmen, or they were managers, or they were truck drivers, or they were vets, or they were doctors, or they were doing something, horse breakers, gillaroos, who were working for the corporates. And it just wasn't the case in my day. There weren't that many women working outside the wire. And now 50% of the corporate stock camps are now women. Women are preferred employees in horse studs, because women treat horses better, I have to say. Not, it's a generalisation, but women work well with horses. Women are quieter with cattle. Women are better communicators. There's a whole lot of, and women have just got to realise how really great they are.
We can do
it.
Girls. Yes. And you mentioned there was a heap of literature and podcasts. Do you have favourites that you listen to, Sally, or that you would recommend?
Well, I've obviously listened to you, and I've listened to Motherland, and I was interviewed Secrets from the Green Room. No, that's not a rural one. Goodness, I've been, I joined Instagram.
Yes.
And it went public on Facebook as promo for my book. So now I'm getting sort of a lot of feedback from people who've read the book or who want to do interviews such as this. And a lot of them are sort of rural pods. And every time I listen to one, because I walk here at Byron as well, and I do like listening to those rural pods when I'm actually out walking. And I just think what a wonderful resource it is now that was not available before. And people like yourself who are actually starting up your own resource and sharing your knowledge and your coping abilities with perhaps newbies. So good for you.
A wonderful community to be a part of.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is. And the important thing is to realise you can do it.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can't do.
I love that you said the confidence to do it, because it's definitely part of it. We have the ability to do it. Let's get the confidence to do it.
Yeah. Breathe deeply and say, I can do this. I've done much harder. Look, you've had children. There's nothing harder than that.
Well, Sally, that comes to the end of all my official questions. Did you have anything else that you wish to share with the listeners of the Rural Mum community?
No, just thank you for inviting me to speak. And I have enormous admiration for you young women coming up now. And it was cathartic for me to write about my experiences from those years ago. And obviously people have enjoyed it because I keep getting lots of feedback. It's a comparison thing, you know. I mean, the life that I was leading then really doesn't exist at all. So it's a bit historical. It certainly ages me, but I just, walking into that room with all of those women in Darwin, I just thought, go girls, you're absolutely taking the industry by the throat.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Sally, for coming on the podcast. If we have mentioned anything during the interview, it will be linked down below. Until next time, thank you for joining us here on the farm.